A man is dying, his throat is closing, his world narrowing to a single desperate gasp for air. A baby, who has never held a coin, picks up the only thing that can save him. What happened next wasn't just gratitude. It was a detonation that shattered one life to save another, and the aftermath will break you. This is the story of two people living in the same house, but on different planets. Oliver Thorne, a 47-year-old tech founder whose wealth could not protect him from a deadly nut allergy, and Maria Flores, his live-in nanny, who was there for one reason: her daughter needed a roof. Their worlds were sealed off from each other by contract, by class, and by silent understanding. Until the day the air in Oliver's lungs vanished, and the only person who could reach him in time was a child who called a $5 million penthouse home, but didn't own a single toy inside it. Oliver Thorne lived inside a fortress of his own design. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Aurora Tower, a glass sphere in the city skyline. Every surface was sterile, polished, and cold. The air was filtered through a medical-grade HEPA system that cost more than a luxury car. There were no plants because soil could harbor mold, no rugs because dust was a threat. The kitchen was a certified nut-free zone, a condition enforced by a contract with the building that had required signatures from 17 different tenants below him. This was not a home. It was a life support system for a man whose body had betrayed him. His allergy was not a childhood sensitivity. It was an acquired, adult-onset anaphylaxis to tree nuts that had first surfaced when he was 39. One bite of a dessert at a charity gala, a dessert he had eaten a dozen times before. His throat had begun to close in the middle of a sentence about quarterly projections. The paramedics had used 2 epinephrine injections to get him stable. From that night forward, fear became his most constant companion. He built a company, Thorne Dynamics, that pioneered biometric security software. He could protect data, assets, entire networks from intrusion, but he could not protect himself from a stray pistachio in a salad. He kept 3 EpiPens on his person at all times, one in the inner pocket of his suit jacket, one in a holster on his ankle, a third in a magnetic case attached to the underside of his desk. He had systems, protocols, drills. His personal assistant, David, was trained in their use. So was his driver. So was the head of building security. Oliver's life was a series of contingency plans, each one designed to outrun a reaction that could kill him in under 5 minutes. But the protocols required other people. And after the IPO, after the lawsuits, after what happened with his brother, Oliver had stopped trusting people. Which is why Maria Flores's employment contract was 27 pages long. It wasn't a nanny agreement. It was a non-disclosure, non-liability, and biological hazard document. Clause 12 specified that she and any dependents must consume all meals off premises or from a pre-approved delivery service that Oliver's nutritionist vetted. Clause 14 prohibited the introduction of any outside food, candy, or unsealed beverages into the penthouse. Clause 19 outlined the immediate termination and forfeiture of all severance if any nut product, defined in Appendix C, was ever detected on her person or in her belongings. She signed it without reading every line. She needed the job too badly. Maria's world was measured in ounces and overdue notices. Her daughter, Chloe, was 2 years and 8 months old. She had wide, curious eyes and a habit of holding conversations with inanimate objects. Their previous home had been a studio apartment above a bakery, a fact that now filled Maria with a cold dread, because the smell of almond paste had been in the walls. When the eviction notice came, she had exactly $412 in savings. The agency placement for the live-in nanny position felt like divine intervention. The salary was 3 times what she made cleaning offices. It included a private suite. It was salvation wrapped in legal warnings. She moved in on a Tuesday in October. Her suite was down a long hallway from the main living area, a small but pristine bedroom and bathroom with a fold-out crib already assembled. The window looked out onto a concrete service alley. It was the most beautiful view she had ever seen, because it was safe. That first night, she lay awake listening to the absolute silence of wealth. No sirens, no shouting, no clanging pipes, just the low, perpetual hum of the air filters. She held Chloe close and made a promise to herself. She would be invisible, she would follow the rules, She would not give him a single reason to send them back to the noise. Oliver's routine was a metronome. He woke at 5:15. He worked out in his private gym until 6:30. He reviewed security briefings from 7 until 8. At 8:05, he entered the main living area, where Maria would have already placed his breakfast, steel-cut oats with blueberries, prepared in the sealed, sterile kitchenette in her suite, on the dining table. He did not look at her. He rarely spoke. If he needed something, he sent a text to her company-issued phone. Mori coffee, the reports from Singapore, adjust the thermostat in the study. She was a function, a response to a prompt. She preferred it that way. Chloe, however, did not understand functions. To her, this vast, equi space was a new universe to explore. The first week, Maria kept her locked in their suite during Oliver's waking hours, but a 2-year-old is a force of nature. The second week, during Oliver's afternoon conference call, Chloe learned to turn the door handle. Maria found her in the main living room, sitting perfectly still on the floor, staring at the panoramic city view as if it were a television screen. Oliver was 10 feet away at his desk, his back to them, speaking into a headset. Maria scooped Chloe up, her heart hammering, waiting for the sharp command. It never came. He never turned around. A pattern formed, born of exhaustion and necessity. Maria would do her cleaning while Oliver was in his morning workout, and Chloe would trail behind her with a toy, a silent shadow. The child was fascinated by the cleaning itself, the spray bottle, the cloth, the vacuum's roar. She began to mimic Maria, wiping at baseboards with a napkin. One Wednesday, Maria was polishing the glass coffee table. Chloe, as usual, was beside her. Oliver walked in early from his gym session, a towel around his neck. He stopped. He looked at Chloe, who was earnestly buffing a non-existent smudge on the table's edge with her sleeve. He said nothing. His expression didn't change, but he didn't leave. He stood there for a full 10 seconds, watching. Then he turned and walked to his study. Maria let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. The only other person in the penthouse during the day was David, the assistant, mid-40s, impeccably dressed, with the calm demeanor of a hostage negotiator. He was the human interface between Oliver and the world. One afternoon, Maria was in the kitchenette rinsing Chloe's sippy cup when David came in to brew a fresh pot of coffee. "He's not always like this," David said quietly, without looking at her. Maria froze, unsure if he was speaking to her. David measured the grounds. Before the allergy diagnosis, before the company blew up, he was different. Not nice, mind you, but present. He pressed start on the machine. The EpiPens, they're a symptom. The disease is the certainty that everything outside his control is trying to kill him. He took the carafe and left. Maria stood at the sink, the water running, understanding for the first time that the man in the study was not powerful. He was trapped. 2 days later, the first breach occurred. It was a Thursday. Oliver had a series of investor calls. Maria was steam cleaning the upholstery in the media room. Chloe was in their suite for a nap, or so Maria thought. The steam cleaner was loud. She didn't hear the soft padding of feet. She didn't hear the study door, which was usually locked, click open. Oliver was on a video call, his back to the door, discussing firewall penetration rates. He did not see the small figure wander in. He did not see her approach his desk, drawn by the shiny, red magnetic case stuck beneath it. Chloe reached out, wrapped her small hand around the case, and pulled. It came free with a soft snap. Oliver heard it. He turned. On his screen, a board member in London was mid-sentence. Oliver saw the child. He saw the red case in her hand, his EpiPen, the one from under the desk. Every protocol in his brain short-circuited. His breath hitched, not from an allergen but from sheer incandescent panic. "Put that down," he said, his voice a low, dangerous wire. Chloe looked at him, then at the case. She shook it. It rattled. "No," she said, matter-of-factly. On the video call, the board member asked, "Oliver, is everything all right?" Maria, hearing the strange silence from the steam cleaner's halt, appeared in the doorway. Her blood went cold. She saw Chloe. She saw the red case. She saw Oliver's face, a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She moved faster than she thought possible, crossing the room and gently prying the case from Chloe's grip. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne. She must have woken up. I'm so sorry." She placed the case back on his desk. Oliver was staring at Chloe, who was now hiding behind Maria's legs. He disconnected the video call without a word to the people on screen. The room was silent. "She can't be in here," he finally said, his voice hollow. "Ever." That night, Maria cried silently in the shower. She had broken the most important rule: do not become a problem. She packed their meager belongings, expecting a termination text by morning. It never came. The next day, Oliver left for a weekend business trip to Zurich. The tension left the penthouse with him. David oversaw the installation of a new, high-pitched alarm on the door to Maria's suite. Child-proofing, he said, with an apologetic shrug. When Oliver returned, he was colder, more distant. The texts came more frequently. The air felt thinner. Maria doubled down on her invisibility. She taught Chloe a new game, the quiet mouse. They would tiptoe everywhere, speaking in whispers. The penthouse, always silent, now felt like a tomb. And then, on a rainy Tuesday in November, exactly 1 year after his first severe reaction, Oliver Thorne's fortress cracked. He had flown back early from a meeting in Chicago, exhausted. David had the day off. Maria had just put Chloe down for her nap and was folding laundry in her suite. Oliver decided to eat lunch at his desk, something he almost never did. A salad, delivered from the approved service. He took one bite, then another. A minute later, a familiar creeping itch started at the back of his throat. His mind, foggy with jet lag, dismissed it. Stress, dry air. He took a sip of water. The itch became a swell, a tightness. He looked down at the salad, pushing the greens aside with his fork. There, nestled among the kale, was a single slivered almond. It must have been cross-contamination at the commercial kitchen. A 1,000,000-to-1 failure of his system. Panic, cold, and absolute shot through him. He reached for the inner pocket of his jacket. Empty. He changed suits after his flight. The pen was in the garment bag, now in the trunk of his car downstairs, en route to the cleaner. His ankle. He fumbled with his pant leg. The holster was there. It was empty. He remembered now. He'd used that pen for a training demonstration with his security team the previous week. He'd forgotten to replace it. The desk. The magnetic case. He yanked open the drawer where he kept it. It wasn't there. In his post-travel haze, he had moved it to the bedside table, in his bedroom, 30 seconds away. He stood, his vision beginning to tunnel. The air wouldn't come. He tried to call out, but his voice was a strangled wheeze. He stumbled from his desk, knocking over his chair. He had to get to the bedroom. He took 2 steps toward the door. His legs buckled. He collapsed onto the cold, polished concrete floor. The world faded to a narrow pinprick of light. His last coherent thought was not of his company, or his money, or his legacy. It was a stupid, simple thought. After all the plans, it's a salad. In her suite, Maria heard the heavy, jarring thud. It was not a normal sound in the silent penthouse. She paused, her hands in the laundry. Then she heard it, a gurgling, rasping struggle for breath, a sound no human should make. Her body understood before her mind did. She ran out into the hallway and saw him. Oliver Thorne, crumpled on the floor like a broken doll, his face turning a dusky blue, his hands clawing weakly at his own throat. And standing in the hallway, just outside her door, was Chloe, awake from her nap, holding the shiny, red magnetic case she had taken from the study weeks ago, the case Maria had thought she'd returned, the case that had never been on Oliver's desk. Chloe had kept it. She had been carrying it around like a treasure for days. She looked at her mother. She looked at the man on the floor. And she did the only thing that made sense to her 2-year-old mind. She walked over to him, sat down beside his head, and placed the red case gently on the floor next to his cheek. Maria's mind split into 2 tracks. One screamed, a primal animal sound that filled her skull. The other, the one that had gotten her through every bad day, went cold and clear. She saw the red case. She saw her daughter's small hand on it. She saw Oliver's lips, now a frightening shade of purple. She did not think about the contract. She did not think about Clause 19. She dropped to her knees, fumbled with the case. It snapped open. Inside was the familiar yellow-and-orange device. An EpiPen. She had never held one. She had only seen diagrams in the mandatory training video during her onboarding, a video she'd watched on mute while rocking a fussy Chloe. The instructions flashed in her memory. Pull off the blue safety cap. Place the orange tip against the outer thigh. Press hard until you hear a click. Hold for 10 seconds. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. The blue cap came off. She shoved up the leg of Oliver's tailored trousers, exposing his pale thigh. She didn't hesitate. She jammed the orange tip against his skin and pressed. A loud, mechanical asterisk click echoed in the silent room. She held it, counting in her head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Chloe watched, her eyes wide, still sitting cross-legged on the floor. 3 Mississippi. Oliver's body jerked. 4 Mississippi. A gasp, wet and ragged, tore from his throat. 5 Mississippi. His chest heaved. 6 Mississippi. His eyes, wide with terror, found hers. 7 Mississippi. The blue was receding from his face, replaced by a blotchy red flush. 8 Mississippi, 9 Mississippi, 10. She pulled the pen away. A small needle protruded from the tip. She carefully placed the used device back in the case, her movements robotic. The sound of his breathing, harsh and wheezing but present, was the loudest thing she had ever heard. "Chloe," Maria said, her voice strangely calm, "go to our room right now. Close the door." Chloe, sensing the shift in her mother's tone, stood up and toddled away without a word. Maria grabbed her phone. She dialed 911. Her voice was flat as she gave the address, the apartment number, described the anaphylactic reaction, the administration of epinephrine. The dispatcher told her to keep him lying down to monitor his breathing. She set the phone on the floor and looked at Oliver. He was trying to speak, but only rough sounds came out. His hand flailed, pointing weakly toward the hallway. "What?" Maria asked, leaning closer. "Second," he managed to choke out. "Second dose." Of course, the training video. A second dose could be needed if symptoms returned or didn't improve. But where? Her eyes darted around the room. The ankle holster was empty. The jacket was elsewhere. The bedroom. He had nodded toward the hallway. She sprinted to his bedroom, a place she had never entered. It was stark, minimalist. On the nightstand next to a glass of water was another red case. She snatched it and ran back. Oliver's breathing was still strained, but his eyes were more focused. He held out a trembling hand. She understood. She opened the case, removed the second EpiPen, and placed it in his palm. His fingers closed around it. He held it against his own thigh, a backup, a security blanket made of medicine and fear. For a long minute, they just sat there on the cold floor, a billionaire and a nanny, connected by the chemical now coursing through his veins, by the child who had unwittingly set the rescue in motion. Paramedics arrived in under 4 minutes. The building's private elevator bypassed all other floors. They flooded the space with controlled chaos. Maria stood back, clutching Chloe's stolen red case to her chest, watching as they put an oxygen mask on Oliver, started an IV, asked him questions he could now whisper answers to. One of the paramedics, a woman with kind eyes, glanced at the used EpiPen in its case on the floor. "You administered this?" she asked Maria. Maria nodded. "Good job. You saved his life, no hesitation." The words should have felt like a reward. They felt like a verdict. Oliver was loaded onto a gurney. As they wheeled him out, his head turned. He looked past the paramedics, past David, who had just arrived, pale-faced and frantic. He looked directly at Maria, who was still standing frozen in the hallway. He didn't speak, but the look was not anger. It was something else, something like stunned disbelief. Then he was gone, the elevator doors closing on the silent aftermath. The silence that followed was different. It was charged, waiting. David let out a long, shaky breath. "Okay," he said, more to himself than to Maria. "Okay, we need to manage this." His professional facade was cracked, revealing the sheer terror underneath. "Maria, we need to talk. Now, in the study." She followed him, her legs numb. Chloe was quietly playing with blocks in their suite, the door ajar. David closed the study door behind them. He didn't sit. "Tell me exactly what happened. From the beginning, don't leave anything out." She told him, the thud, the sound, finding Oliver, Chloe with the case, the injection. Her voice was a monotone. When she finished, David pinched the bridge of his nose. "The child had the EpiPen from the study from weeks ago. It wasn't a question, and you didn't know she had it." "I thought I put it back. I swore I did. She must have. She must have hidden it in her toy bin. I didn't know." David paced. "This is a catastrophic liability event. Do you understand? You used a potentially compromised medical device that was in the unauthorized possession of a minor. If there had been an air bubble, if the mechanism had failed, if you'd injected it wrong, he could have died, and you would be facing criminal negligence. The company's insurers would have." He stopped, realizing he was spiraling. He took a breath. "He's alive. That's the only thing that matters right now. But there will be consequences." "Am I fired?" Maria asked, the words tasting like ash. "I don't have the authority to fire you," David said. "Only he does, and I have no idea what he's thinking right now, but you need to be prepared. The legal team will be involved. There will be an internal review. For now, stay in your suite. Care for your daughter. Do not speak to anyone about this. Not a soul. Do you understand?" She understood. She was back in lockdown. She returned to her room, gathered Chloe in her arms, and held her for a very long time. The child, oblivious to the storm she had caused, babbled about the loud click and the men with the bed. At the hospital, Oliver Thorne was not treated as a normal patient. He was placed in a private wing. His personal physician, Dr. Vance, was already there, conferring with the ER doctors. The diagnosis was clear: anaphylaxis, triggered by likely cross-contamination, treated promptly with epinephrine. He would need to stay overnight for observation. Standard procedure, but nothing about this was standard. Lying in the hospital bed, the adrenaline replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion, Oliver had nothing to do but think. And the thought that looped, relentless, was not about the almond. It was about the sequence of failures. His jacket, his ankle holster, his own negligence. His fortress had been breached from within by his own complacency. And the hole in the wall, the flaw that had ultimately let light in, was a 2-year-old girl with a fascination for shiny red boxes. He thought of Maria's face, moments after the click. Not triumphant, not scared, resigned, as if she had just signed her own termination papers with that act of salvation. He thought of the contract, all 27 pages of it, a document designed to eliminate variables, to control the human element. And in the moment all his control vanished, the human element, the one he had tried so hard to minimize, had saved him. David arrived at the hospital that evening with a tablet and a folder. "The press hasn't caught wind yet," he said. "We've contained it to the building staff and the private paramedic service. Non-disclosures are being reinforced. How are you feeling?" "Fine," Oliver said, his voice still hoarse. He pointed to the folder. "What's that?" David hesitated. "The preliminary internal report and a document from legal." He opened the folder. On top was a single sheet of paper, a draft severance agreement for Maria Flores. It was generous. 6 months' salary, a neutral reference. The condition, a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement in perpetuity with substantial penalties for breach. The unspoken message: "Thank you for your service, now go away quietly." Oliver stared at the paper. Legal's recommendation. "Standard protocol for a liability incident of this magnitude," David said carefully. "She performed admirably under pressure, but the circumstances of the incident, the child's access to the medication, it represents an untenable risk profile moving forward. She saved my life." "I understand that, Oliver, but the how is a nightmare from a risk management perspective. The simplest, cleanest solution is a gracious exit." Oliver was silent for a long time. He looked out the window at the city lights. Where is she now? In her suite, with the child, awaiting instructions. Has she asked about her job? No, she hasn't said a word. Oliver took the severance agreement. He held it for a moment, then he tore it in half and then in half again. David's eyes widened. "Oliver." "Bring her a new contract," Oliver said, his voice gaining strength. 1 page, job title, Director of Household Safety and Operations, salary, triple what she's making now, responsibilities to be defined, effective immediately, and get a proper crib, not a fold-out, a real one. David was speechless. This was not in any protocol. "Oliver, the legal team, the board, they'll want a review. This is highly irregular." "I don't care," Oliver said, and for the first time in years it was true. The old protocols failed. We're writing new ones, starting with the fact that the person who knows how to navigate the flaws in my security system isn't the head of it. It's the woman who lives in the back hallway. Now go, before I change my mind. Back at the penthouse, Maria was packing. She had just zipped up the smaller suitcase when there was a knock on her suite door. It was David. He looked weary but carried a single sheet of paper. He didn't hand her the severance agreement. He explained Oliver's offer. Maria listened, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she said, "Director of Household Safety and Operations, what does that mean?" "It means," David said, a faint, tired smile touching his lips, "that he's finally admitting he doesn't have all the answers, and it means you're not fired, you're promoted, with a significant raise." She looked at the paper, then at her sleeping daughter. The safety, the roof, the future, it was all being offered back, wrapped in a baffling new title. "Why?" she asked, the only question that mattered. "I don't know," David admitted, but he tore up the severance agreement. "In my 10 years with him, I've never seen him do anything that emotionally impulsive. Maria signed the new contract. She stayed. The next day, Oliver returned from the hospital. The dynamic had shifted. He didn't ignore her. He acknowledged her with a curt nod. He gave her a task: audit all medical supplies and protocols, find every single point of failure, report to me directly. It was work. It was distance, but it was communication. A week later, the first package arrived, addressed to Chloe. Inside was a stuffed animal, a ridiculously soft rabbit wearing a tiny paramedic vest. There was no card. Chloe adored it. She called it Dr. Hops. Maria found Oliver watching from the doorway of the study as Chloe showed Dr. Hops how to clean the baseboards. He quickly looked away, but he didn't close the door. This could have been the end. A quiet, private recalibration. A story of grudging gratitude that stayed within four walls. But Oliver Thorne was a public figure, and the universe, it seemed, had other plans. 2 weeks after the incident, a blogger who covered tech industry gossip received an anonymous tip, not from a staff member, from a disgruntled former employee of the catering service that had supplied the fatal salad. The tip was sparse: check the ER logs for Aurora Tower on November 12th. Thorne had a close call. His nanny saved him. Kid was involved. Pretty wild. The blogger dug. He called in favors with a freelance paramedic. He pieced together a fragment of the story, just enough to be dangerous, not enough to be accurate. The headline went live at 8 a.m. on a Monday. Thorne Dynamics CEO in secret health scare. Was a nanny's toddler the unlikely hero? It had questions, insinuations, and one glaring, irresistible hook: a baby and a billionaire. By 9 a.m., Oliver's phone was ringing off the hook. Board members, investors, reporters from mainstream outlets smelling blood in the water. The narrative was already spiraling out of control. Was Thorne Dynamics CEO too ill to lead? Was his personal life a liability? Was there a negligence lawsuit waiting to happen? David stood in the study, running damage control. We issue a bland statement. Mr. Thorne experienced a minor allergic reaction, was treated promptly, and is in excellent health. We appreciate the concern, but respect the family's privacy. We starve the story of oxygen. Oliver was staring at his computer screen, reading the comments on the article. They were a toxic mix of speculation, jokes about rich people's problems, and a few heartfelt notes from people with severe allergies. One comment, buried near the bottom, caught his eye. It read, "My son has anaphylaxis. This is my worst nightmare. If a baby really helped save him, that's not a scandal. That's a miracle. Why are we turning it into gossip?" He leaned back in his chair. He thought of the torn severance agreement. He thought of Maria's resigned face. He thought of Chloe placing the red case beside his head. A private miracle, a public relations headache. The two realities collided in his mind. "No," Oliver said, cutting David off mid-sentence. "No, Oliver, we have to. We're not issuing a denial, we're not hiding." Oliver's voice was quiet but firm. "Call a press conference." David stared at him as if he'd suggested setting the building on fire. A press conference? To say asterisk what? "To tell the truth," Oliver said, "all of it." That is the single worst possible idea from a corporate, legal, and personal reputation standpoint, David sputtered. "You cannot get in front of cameras and talk about your medical emergency and your domestic staff. The board will have an aneurysm." "Let them," Oliver said. He stood up, a new, unsettling certainty in his eyes. "The story is already out there, broken and ugly. We can either let them define it, or we can define it ourselves. Schedule it for tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. and David, invite Maria to attend." The next 22 hours were a controlled detonation. David moved like a man orchestrating his own firing squad. He booked the conference room at the Thorne Dynamics headquarters, a sterile glass box designed for product launches, not personal confessions. He drafted talking points Oliver immediately discarded. He fielded frantic calls from board members, each one more apoplectic than the last. The chairman, a 70-year-old venture capital legend named Arthur Finch, flew in from Aspen. He stood in Oliver's study, his face purpling. "You will not turn a private medical episode into a circus. You will issue a written statement, and then you will go silent. This is not a negotiation, Oliver. This is an order." Oliver, for the first time in his professional life, did not back down. It stopped being private the moment a blogger got a tip. Arthur, we either control the narrative or it controls us. I'm controlling it. By throwing yourself to the wolves, by parading your domestic staff, have you lost your mind? Maybe, Oliver said, his gaze steady, but I almost lost my life. And the way I see it, the people in that room tomorrow aren't wolves. They're customers, investors, employees, and every single one of them is just as fragile as I am. They get sick. They have kids. They get scared. I'm not going to stand up there and sell them a lie about invulnerability. Not anymore. Finch left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass wall. David looked at Oliver. He's going to call an emergency board vote. Let him, Oliver said, but his hands were trembling slightly. He wasn't immune to the pressure. He was choosing to walk into the storm anyway. Maria, meanwhile, was in a state of quiet terror. A press conference, to be seen, to be named, to have her face and Chloe's story splashed across the world. It was every instinct screaming to hide. David had given her the option. You don't have to attend, he can't make you, it's your choice. But it didn't feel like a choice. It felt like another clause in a contract she hadn't read. If she said no, would the new job, the safety, evaporate? If she said yes, what would it mean for Chloe? That night she didn't sleep. She watched her daughter sleep, the rise and fall of her small chest, and made a decision. She would go, not for Oliver, for Chloe, to make sure that when the story was told, her daughter was seen not as a liability or a curiosity, but as a child. The morning of the press conference, Maria dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a simple black dress she'd bought for a friend's funeral 2 years prior. She left Chloe with Mrs. de Villa, the building concierge who had become a reluctant babysitter, with strict instructions to keep the television off. David escorted her through a private garage entrance, away from the gathered media scrum at the building's main entrance. The ride to Thorn Dynamics was silent. When they arrived, they were whisked up a private elevator to a green room. Oliver was already there, packing. He stopped when she entered. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice gruff. "You don't have to speak, just be here." At 9:59, they stood behind a heavy curtain, listening to the murmur of dozens of voices, the clicks of cameras. David gave them a last, despairing look. Remember, concise, human, no legalese. Then he pulled the curtain back. The flash of cameras was a physical assault. Maria blinked, her vision swimming. Oliver guided her to a chair at a long table, then took the central microphone. He did not smile. He did not offer a greeting. He looked out at the sea of expectant, skeptical faces and began. "My name is Oliver Thorne. 2 weeks ago, I suffered a severe anaphylactic reaction in my home, a reaction that would have killed me in minutes." He paused, letting the starkness of the words hang. "The systems I had in place to prevent that, systems I spent years and a considerable amount of money building, failed completely. I was alone. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't call for help. I was, for all practical purposes, a dead man." He turned slightly, gesturing to Maria. "This is Maria Flores. She is the Director of Household Safety and Operations for my home. She is also, as of 2 weeks ago, the reason I am standing here. She administered the epinephrine that saved my life." A wave of murmurs swept the room. Cameras swung to Maria. She kept her eyes on the table, her hands folded in her lap, knuckles white. "But that's only half the story," Oliver continued, his voice gaining strength. "The epinephrine she used was located and brought to her by a 2-year-old child, her daughter Chloe." He let that sink in. The room was utterly silent now. A child who weeks prior had found the EpiPen and kept it, not knowing what it was. A child who, in the moment of crisis, did the only thing she knew how to do. She brought the shiny red case to the adult who was in trouble. "That simple, instinctive act is the only reason I'm alive. Not my money, not my protocols. A toddler with a stuffed rabbit." He then did the unthinkable. He detailed his failures. The empty holster, the misplaced jacket, the complacency. He didn't sugarcoat it. He called it negligence, his own. Then he pivoted. "We talk a lot in tech about disruption, about elegant solutions. Well, here was the most elegant disruption imaginable. A flaw in my security, a child's curiosity, became the very patch that saved it. This isn't a story about a billionaire's close call. It's a story about how our best-laid plans are fragile, and how sometimes salvation comes from the last place we'd ever think to look." He announced 2 things. First, Thorne Dynamics would be founding the Chloe Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free anaphylaxis training and epinephrine autoinjectors to underfunded daycares and preschools across the country. Second, Maria Flores would have a seat on its advisory board with a full salary and voting power. Then he opened the floor to questions. The first few were softballs about his health, about the specifics of the new charity. Then a reporter from a major financial network stood. "Mr. Thorne, isn't this just a clever PR pivot? You're monetizing your own medical emergency and using a child's story to rehabilitate your image after a year of declining stock performance and the failed Atlas acquisition." Oliver didn't flinch. "The stock price is what it is. The Atlas deal failed because the numbers didn't work. This," he said, gesturing between himself and Maria, "is not a pivot, it's a fact. I was saved by my employee and her child. You can choose to be cynical about that. I choose to be grateful and to try and make sure other people get the same chance I did." Another reporter from a tabloid shouted a question at Maria. "Ms. Flores, is it true you were about to be fired for negligence before this happened? Did you save your boss to save your job?" Maria froze. The room's attention snapped to her. She looked at Oliver, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice barely audible at first. I didn't think about my job. I didn't think about anything except the sound he was making, the sound of someone drowning in air." She took a breath, her voice strengthening. "And no one who has ever held their child and wondered how they'll pay rent would ever risk that child's safety to play a game. We were just people in a room, one who needed help, one who could give it, that's all." Her answer, raw and unpolished, landed with a quiet thud. The cynical chatter died down. For a moment, the press conference wasn't about scandal or stock prices. It was about two people on a floor and a red case. The event ended. The immediate news cycle was, against all odds, positive. Human interest segments played the clip of Maria speaking. Oliver was framed as humbled, transformed. The Chloe Initiative website crashed from traffic. Donations poured in. For 72 hours, it seemed Oliver's gamble had paid off in reputation capital. But the internet is a hall of mirrors, and in the reflections, darker distortions began to form. It started in the comments sections and niche forums. Conspiracy theories, as they do, bloomed in the fertile soil of a story that seemed too perfect. A thread on a popular gossip site, viewed millions of times, asked the question, what if it was staged? The theory gained traction with alarming speed. Skeptics picked it apart. The convenient blogger tip, the instant charity launch, the promotion of the Nanny, the timing just before a crucial board vote on executive compensation. It was all too neat, a masterclass in crisis management. "He's not a changed man," one viral tweet stated. "He's a CEO who just leveraged a fake medical scare and a poor woman's child to sell a comeback narrative." Then the whistleblower. 4 days after the press conference, an anonymous account on a journalist tip-sharing platform released a series of documents. They were internal Thorne Dynamics emails from the week asterisk before the incident. In them, David, Oliver's assistant, discussed with the legal team potential narrative reset strategies given the company's slipping market share. One line was highlighted in red. A public display of vulnerability, if authentically framed, could realign public perception. We need a catalyst that reads as human, not corporate. The anonymous source claimed this was proof. The entire event was planned. The catalyst was the allergic reaction. The implication was monstrous, that Oliver had knowingly risked his life or even faked the reaction and used Maria and Chloe as pawns. The story exploded. The positive human interest cycle reversed into a tsunami of outrage. Billionaire fakes allergic reaction, exploits toddler for sympathy trended globally. The board of Thorne Dynamics, led by Arthur Finch, called an emergency meeting and voted to suspend Oliver as CEO, pending an internal investigation. The Chloe Initiative's major corporate backers pulled out. Maria, watching the news on her phone in her suite, felt the world drop out from under her. The roof, the safety, the future, it was all crumbling into a nightmare of hashtags and hate. David was beside himself. "The emails are real," he admitted to Oliver, his face ashen. "But they were about the asterisk charity idea we'd been kicking around for months. The catalyst line was about finding the right moment to launch it, not about manufacturing a medical event. We have to sue for defamation. We have to expose the leaker. Oliver was quiet. He sat in his study, the garden door locked again, the curtains drawn. The fortress was resealing, but this time the enemy was inside the walls, in the code of public opinion. He looked at the stuffed rabbit, Dr. Hops, sitting on a shelf where Chloe had left it. He had tried to tell the truth, to be transparent, and the truth had been twisted into a weapon that was now destroying everything he'd tried to rebuild. Then a new notification pinged on his phone, a direct message on a platform he rarely used. It was from the anonymous whistleblower account. It contained a single sentence, "Ask your nanny about her husband." Oliver's blood ran cold. He called David. "What do we know about Maria's personal life, her family?" David, confused, pulled up the original agency file. Single mother, father of the child is listed as unknown, no current spouse. Why? Dig deeper now. What David found an hour later changed the axis of the entire story. Maria Flores had been married. Her husband, Eduardo Flores, was not gone as she had said. He was in prison, serving a 12-year sentence for aggravated assault and attempted kidnapping. The victim, his own daughter, Chloe. The incident had occurred when Chloe was 6 months old. Eduardo, suffering from severe, untreated psychosis, had tried to take the infant from a public park, threatening bystanders with a knife. Maria had gotten Chloe back and had testified against him to ensure he was committed to a psychiatric facility within the prison system. She had changed her last name back to her maiden name, Reyes, legally, but the agency had her old records. She had lied on her application, checking the box for no criminal record in immediate family. It was the kind of lie told by someone with no other options. Oliver now had the missing piece. The whistleblower wasn't a disgruntled employee. It was someone connected to Eduardo Flores, someone who knew Maria's past and was using it to destroy her credibility and, by extension, Oliver's. This wasn't corporate espionage. It was personal, vindictive, and aimed directly at the woman who had saved him. He went to Maria's suite. He showed her the message. Her face drained of all color, she sank onto the bed. "He has a brother," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Miguel, he blames me for what happened to Eduardo. He said I should have stood by him, gotten him help privately. He said I betrayed the family. He's been sending me letters. I changed my number, I moved. I thought when I got this job, I was finally out of reach." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Oliver asked, not with anger, but with a dawning understanding. "Tell them what? That the nanny applying to work in your sterile, secure palace has a violent felon for an ex-husband and a vengeful brother-in-law. You would have thrown me out on the street. And Chloe," she broke off, hugging herself. "He found me. He's doing this to punish me, to take away the good thing I found." Oliver looked at her, this woman who had borne so much in silence, who had saved his life only to have her own torn open for the world to see. The public storm was bad enough, but this was a targeted strike at the heart of her survival. He made a decision. The press conference had been about controlling a narrative. This was about ending a war. "Give me Miguel's full name," Oliver said, his voice low and steady, "and every letter he ever sent you." "Why? What are you going to do?" "What I should have done from the beginning," Oliver said. "I'm going to protect my family." The line hung in the air, my family. He hadn't planned to say it, but it was true. In the shattered silence of that penthouse, 3 broken people had become entangled in something that looked, against all odds, like kinship. And now one of them was under attack. Oliver Thorne, the man who trusted systems over people, realized the only system left was the one he could build with the people in this room. The whistleblower had just made a fatal error. He hadn't just attacked Oliver's reputation. He had threatened a child, and Oliver Thorne, for all his flaws, now had something real to fight for. Oliver Thorne did not call his lawyers first. He called Arthur Finch, the board chairman. He requested a private meeting, not at the office, but at Finch's club. When they sat down in the leather-bound silence of the library, Oliver placed 2 files on the table. The first contained the whistleblower's message and the evidence linking it to Miguel Flores. The second contained the draft of a lawsuit for defamation, harassment, and conspiracy, naming both Miguel and, as co-conspirators, 3 board members Finch had been quietly aligned with, members who stood to gain financially if Oliver was ousted. "You have 48 hours to reinstate me and vote out these three," Oliver said, his voice calm. "Or I file this, and I take the whole sordid story, the attack on a toddler, the board's internal power play using a traumatized woman's past, to the New York Times, not the business section, the front page." Finch, a man who understood real power, looked at the files. He saw the chessboard, and he saw Oliver had just taken his queen. "You've changed, Oliver." "No," Oliver replied. "I finally understand what matters, the vote." The board vote happened the next day. Oliver was reinstated as CEO unanimously. The three opposing members resigned for personal reasons. The public story was one of reconciliation and confidence. The internal story was one of a bloodless coup. Oliver had won back his company not with a press conference, but with a threat. He felt no triumph, only a cold clarity. Miguel Flores was a harder problem. He was not a businessman. He was a grieving, angry man living in a rented room in Queens. Oliver's security team found him within a day, but Oliver did not send a legal threat. He went himself, with David and one security detail waiting in the car. He met Miguel in a diner. Miguel was younger than he expected, with tired eyes and nervous hands. "You're here to scare me," Miguel said, not looking up from his coffee. "No," Oliver said, sitting down. "I'm here to tell you that I know what happened to Eduardo. I read the court transcripts. I know Maria testified to get him into a treatment facility, not just a prison. She saved her daughter, and she tried to save your brother too." Miguel's head snapped up. "She put him in a cage." "He threatened his own child with a knife," Oliver said, his voice low but firm. "What would you have done?" Miguel looked away, his jaw tight. Oliver continued. "You wanted to punish her for moving on, for finding safety for her child. I understand that kind of anger. I've lived in it for years. But you didn't just hurt her. You hurt a little girl who has done nothing wrong. My fight is with you now. Leave them out of it." "Or what?" Miguel sneered, but the defiance was thin. "Nothing," Oliver said. He slid a business card across the table. It was for a renowned psychiatrist specializing in family trauma and psychosis, one who consulted with the state's correctional department. "Eduardo's next parole hearing is in 18 months. This doctor can provide an independent assessment for the board, a path to better care, maybe even a transfer to a secure hospital, something you've been petitioning for unsuccessfully for 5 years. I can make that call happen." Miguel stared at the card, his anger dissolving into confusion. "Why would you do that?" "Because Maria wouldn't want me to destroy you," Oliver said simply. "And because this ends today, you stop. You disappear from their lives, and your brother gets a real chance at treatment. That's the deal." Miguel took the card. He didn't agree aloud. He just stood up and walked out of the diner. The harassing messages stopped. The anonymous accounts went dark. The war, for now, was over. With the immediate fires put out, the larger scandal still smoldered in the public square. Oliver knew a second press conference would only add fuel. Instead, he and Maria sat down for one single, long-form interview with a respected journalist known for nuanced profiles. They did it in the penthouse, with Chloe playing quietly in the background with Dr. Hops. They were painfully honest. Maria spoke about her past, about Eduardo's illness, about the shame and fear that led her to lie on her application. She cried, not for the cameras, but for the relief of finally telling the truth without the threat of losing everything. Oliver spoke about his failures, his isolation, his realization that his wealth had built a prison of his own making. He didn't portray himself as a hero. He portrayed himself as a man who was saved, in every sense of the word, by grace he did not deserve. When the journalist asked about the conspiracy theories, Oliver didn't get defensive. He said, "The truth is complicated enough without inventing villains. A man had a medical emergency. A woman acted to save him. Her child helped, that's it. Everything else, the charity, the job title, the scandal, is just noise around that simple fact. If people want to believe a more exciting story, that's their choice. We are choosing to live in the real one." The interview aired on a Sunday night. It was not a viral sensation. It was a slow, steady drip of authenticity that changed the conversation. The screaming headlines faded. The Chloe Initiative, after losing its corporate backers, was relaunched as a community-funded effort. Its first donation was $1 million from Oliver, anonymously. The second was for $20 from a mother in Ohio whose son had anaphylaxis. She wrote in the note, "From one parent who gets it to another." Inside the penthouse, a new routine solidified, not from contracts but from habit. Oliver began eating dinner at the actual dining table, not every night but on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Maria and Chloe joined him. The first time it was painfully awkward. The second time, Chloe spilled milk and Oliver, instead of stiffening, handed her a napkin with a quiet, "It's okay, happens to the best of us." By the fourth time, Chloe was explaining the intricate plot of a cartoon to Oliver, who listened with a focus he usually reserved for board reports. Maria's role evolved. Her Director of Household Safety title became real. She redesigned the medical protocols, not as a fortress, but as a sensible plan. She insisted Oliver carry a simpler, more reliable autoinjector. She arranged for the entire building staff to undergo anaphylaxis training. She became, in essence, the Chief Operations Officer of Oliver Thorne's life, and he listened to her. One afternoon in early spring, Oliver was working in his study when Chloe wandered in. She was now 3 years old. She climbed onto the ottoman beside him, as she had many times before. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You're not sad anymore." Oliver put down his pen. He thought about it. The constant, background hum of dread was gone. The fear of his own body had softened, not vanished, but managed. The loneliness had been filled with the quiet sounds of a family he never intended to have. "No," he said, his voice a little rough. "Not sad anymore." "Good," Chloe said, and went back to coloring. The final surprise came from an envelope with a federal return address. It was addressed to Maria. Inside was a formal notice. Due to a review of new psychiatric evaluations and evidence of sustained progress, Eduardo Flores was being transferred from the state penitentiary to a secure, long-term psychiatric treatment facility. It was not freedom, it was care. It was what Maria had begged the courts for years ago. There was no note from Miguel, but the result was his answer. Maria showed the letter to Oliver. She didn't cry, she just nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders she had carried for so long she'd forgotten its shape. "Thank you," she said. "I didn't do that," Oliver said. "You did. A long time ago when you testified, you planted that seed, I just watered it." The garden door stayed unlocked. Oliver began spending time out there again, not just by the bench, but tending to the few hardy plants that survived. Chloe helped, mostly by moving piles of dirt from one place to another with solemn concentration. Maria would sometimes bring out a cup of tea and sit on the stone bench, watching them. The internet moved on to new scandals, new heroes, new outrages. The story of the nanny's baby and the choking millionaire became a footnote, a piece of trivia in the endless scroll. But in that penthouse, in the quiet moments between the ticks of the trading floor and the setting of the sun, something permanent had taken root. Oliver never made a grand declaration. He never adopted Chloe, never married Maria. Their bond was not one of paperwork, but of shared survival. He revised his will, leaving a third of his estate in a trust for Chloe's education and future, and providing lifelong security for Maria. He did not tell them. He simply had David file the documents. One evening, Maria found a small, framed photograph on the bookshelf in the study. It was a picture she had never seen before, taken by David on a random Tuesday months after the press conference. It showed Oliver, sitting on the floor of the living room, helping Chloe build a catastrophically unbalanced tower of blocks. Both were laughing. Oliver's face was transformed, bright and unguarded. Maria looked at it for a long time. Then she picked it up and placed it on the mantel, where the light from the garden would hit it every morning. The story does not end with a fairy tale wedding or a corporate triumph. It ends with a Tuesday. Oliver has a business lunch. Maria takes Chloe to the park. They come home, and Chloe runs down the hallway, her shoes clicking on the floor, shouting, "Ash, Ash, I saw a dog with socks." She still calls him Ash, the name she decided on months ago, a toddler's contraction she refused to change. Oliver, from his study, calls back, "Were they good socks?" And the conversation continues, a simple, ordinary thread in the fabric of their day. A man who thought he had everything learned he had nothing until he almost lost it all. A woman who had nothing discovered she had the power to save a life, and in doing so saved her own. And a child, too young to understand money or class or fear, did what children do best. She reached out, without hesitation, and in her small hands held the broken pieces together until they could heal. This is where the noise stops and the truth remains, not a viral moment but a human one, quiet, complicated, and enduring. We called this story What He Did After Will Break You, and maybe you thought that meant a grand, dramatic gesture, $1 million check signed on live television, a viral video of a tearful embrace, but the thing that breaks you is never the loud moment. It's the quiet one that comes after. It's the choice to be vulnerable when every instinct says to build a higher wall. It's the decision to protect, not because a contract demands it, but because a child's laughter in the hallway has become the sound of home. Oliver Thorne's response wasn't a single act. It was 1,000 small corrections to a life lived off course. It was reinstating a board member not out of spite, but strategy. It was offering a path to treatment, not vengeance, to a man who sought to hurt them. It was sitting through awkward dinners until they weren't awkward anymore. It was revising a will in silence. This is what broke the internet, not a scandal, but the radical, quiet notion that people can change. That a heart sealed in fear can be pried open not by a crowbar, but by a tiny, persistent hand. We are drawn to these stories because they are mirrors. We see the billionaire and think, that's a world away. We see the nanny and think, I know that struggle. We see the child and see pure, uncorrupted hope. The truth is, we are all three. We are the parts of ourselves that feel isolated in our own fortresses. We are the parts that carry burdens in silence, terrified of being found out. And we are the parts that still remember how to reach for someone without calculation, without fear. The internet wanted a villain or a saint. It found complicated people instead. It wanted a perfect ending. It got a messy, ongoing beginning. That is always the way. The stories that last are not the ones that tie a neat bow. They are the ones that leave you wondering about the next Tuesday and the Tuesday after that. They are the ones that remind you that the most powerful force in the world isn't money or fame or even a life-saving drug. It's the stubborn, quiet decision to show up for another human being again and again and again. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a moment when someone saw you through your own fortress walls, or when you were brave enough to reach for someone else, then this channel is for you. We don't chase the loudest headlines here. We sit with the quiet truths. We believe the stories that matter are the ones about the broken places and how we help each other mend. Subscribe for more. Leave a comment below telling us about a small, quiet moment that changed everything for you. Share this with someone who needs to remember that healing is possible. And remember, the next time you see a viral story, look past the noise. The real story is always happening in the quiet, in the unscripted reply, in the hand offered across a divide that once seemed impossible to cross. It's happening right now.